Do you love parades? Are you interested in writing? Well, then you're lucky, because today I'm going to take you on a parade of my students' most recent rhetorical analysis essays. Even if you're not writing the rhetorical analysis essay right now, that's all right. You'll still benefit because I'll be focusing on the universal structure of logical argument. Yes. Thank you for coming to our first YouTube writing parade. I've used activities like this writing parade in my classroom for years, and I find that my students love them. You can teach through abstract concepts and textbook examples all you want, day in and day out, but for my students, there's nothing like actual student writing to teach students to write. I think it's because real student writing offers insights into the actual type of writing my students are doing right now. It shows the struggles they're having right now, it shows the way they're processing language right now, and the way they're trying to use sentences right now, instead of attempting to mimic it. My students have authorized me to share these examples with you, and that's why I have the best students. Because my students not only want to improve their own writing, but they want to help people like you, who they don't even know, improve their own writing. That's how much my students believe in writing. Today, we're going to look at examples from my students' most recent rhetorical analysis essay. And we're going to focus on thesis and body paragraphs because these are really the most important parts of the essay, and these are the parts I've focused on teaching them right now. We'll read through some short passages together, and then we'll discuss where the writer succeeds and how they might improve. These are my students' first essays and their first attempts at rhetorical analysis. So the writing is not as polished or smooth as I expect we'll see in a few weeks, but it's still going to represent a really strong building block to their writing. The strategies that I'll explain today apply not only to rhetorical analysis essays, but all the logical arguments that you might try to write, which means they'll apply to all the essays that you might type to write, because most of the essays that you read and write are logical arguments. A logical argument begins with an introduction that gives background on the subject that you're writing about and introduces the problem that you're trying to solve or to answer. It then concludes with a thesis that gives the answer to the question you're trying to answer or solves the problem you're trying to solve. It's followed by body paragraphs. The body paragraphs begin with claims that are necessary in order to prove your argument. Within the paragraphs are evidence used to support the claims and commentary that explains how the evidence supports the claims. All the sentences in your paragraph have to be one of these type of sentence, unless it's the concluding sentence. The concluding sentence ties your commentary and your evidence back to your thesis. You can have as many body paragraphs as is necessary to prove your thesis. A typical logical argument then ends with a conclusion that recaps your argument and then offers some kinds of bigger picture insights on how your essay might apply in bigger situations, even perhaps outside of the limited context of your essay. Arguments are the most common essay you're going to write because most people usually write to persuade and to analyze. Yes. Since we're not going to focus on introductions in this video, let's just skip to the thesis first. The thesis is the most important part of your essay because it provides an outline for the whole argument of your essay that's going to follow. Now, the typical rhetorical analysis prompt reads something like, write an essay that analyzes the rhetorical choices that a writer makes in order to persuade their audience according to their message. So now that we have our question, we can think about the structure of the answer to our question, which is our thesis. Basically, in all the theses to the rhetorical analysis question, no matter what the question, you're going to have some version of speaker uses rhetorical choice and rhetorical choice to persuade audience that purpose. Depending on the variables of your question, you'll just be filling in the blanks here. You'll of course have to do all the pre-writing activities that are necessary to come up with the answers to this thesis, especially the rhetorical choices. I have a different video about that. Check it in my playlist. But once you know the structure of the thesis, all your theses can basically have the same structure, no matter the text that you're dealing with, the author you're dealing with, or the audience. You just put the variables in here. So let's see how my students are doing. The good thing is, again, because the structure of the thesis is so universal, I don't even need to show you the prompts. I'll just read these. You can follow along, and then we'll talk about them either after or during our reading of them. Senator Daniel Inouye persuades his audience to understand the difference between a protest that is performed in an orderly manner and a protest against a citizen's responsibilities throughout his keynote address at the Democratic National Convention. What did you think? Does it have all the necessary elements? It's pretty good. It's got a speaker. It's got the audience. Here it's vague. Here it's enough to be specific enough to be worthwhile. It's got purpose. Does it have rhetorical choices? No, it does not have rhetorical choices. So this thesis is doing a good job of articulating some of the necessary elements of the answer to the prompt, but not all of them. Licky. Lick. All right, come on in. Come on in. Come on in. If you really want to help, come on in. No, you don't. No. You either come in or you go out. You can't go in or go out. I thought you were trying to help me. I thought you wanted to be the helper of the day. Oh, Licky boy. I thought you wanted to be the helper of the day. All right, that's it. He's going out. Let's move to another thesis. Daniel Inouye expressed his ideas to American leaders to reevaluate the deprivation of Americans' basic rights to speech and protest through syntax, illusion, and diction. Does this one have all the necessary elements? Well, it's got the speaker, it's got audience, it's got purpose. Purpose is written a little awkwardly, but we can definitely live with that. And we have rhetorical choices. Fire! This thing is fire. When you're writing your theses, it might seem to you that something like this, which is rather simple, is not good enough. But it can be just perfect. You don't need to include all the information about your persuasion in the thesis, and you don't need to include all your information about the speech or the speaker or the rhetorical situation, because you've got an introduction up here that you'll be introducing it to, and you can talk more about these rhetorical choices and their impacts down here. So don't be afraid to keep it simple. Let's look at more. He persuades the American leaders to think critically about Americans' rights in free speech and protest by using diction, syntax, and illusions. So again, that's okay, because in this one, I pulled this from an introduction that introduced Inouye. We've got audience, we've got a purpose, and we've got rhetorical choices. Now, even though both the examples so far that we've looked at that include rhetorical choices here are listing specific literary devices, your choices don't have to be specific literary devices. Your choices just have to be something you can name them. You can call them, like, depending on what you're reading or talking about, you can use phrases like appeals to American values or appeals to family values, or you can call these like references to the ideas of Plato, or I don't even know what you would call them. But if you struggle to come up with a literary device that you need to name them about, that's okay. Just pick a term and be consistent about your term throughout your essay. We need to look at purpose a little bit more here in this example. Think critically about Americans' rights in free speech and protest sounds pretty good, but it's a little vague, because Inouye doesn't just want to persuade people to think about an issue, and people rarely do want others just to think about an issue. They want to persuade somebody to think something specific about an issue. So we need to be more specific here. The way this is written, Inouye could be trying to persuade the American leaders that Americans should not have rights to free speech and protest. But that's actually not what he's talking about. But because this thesis is so vague, it can allow for a misunderstanding. So be specific in purpose. Let's look at another one. So we've moved on to another prompt here. Jaren's use of paradox-style sentences and personification allows her to display the importance of her work as a scientist by demonstrating her form of logic and a moral obligation to care about her work. As you're listening to this one, you can kind of maybe hear that it gets a little wonky. Let's go through it. We've got a speaker. We've got rhetorical choices here and allows her to display the importance of her work as a scientist. I guess that's purpose. But then we've got more rhetorical choices back here in a way. Or at least we've got a rhetorical choice back here and we've got another statement of purpose right here. It's too many statements of rhetorical choice and purpose. Just do it once. So I would say this writer is probably going to want to delete all this here. And if she finds something interesting that she needs from here, she wants to put it up here in one of these clauses where either she's talking about rhetorical choices or where she's talking about purpose. Purpose, unfortunately, is vague. What is the importance of her work according to a scientist, according to Jaren? That's one of the things this thesis needs to answer. Let's look at one more. I gave you this one because it includes some introductory information, and if you're not sure how to write an introduction, this example could be helpful. On August 26th, 1968, Senator Daniel Inouye gave this keynote address at the Democratic National Convention. The site of the National Convention faced widespread protest. In this speech, Inouye sought to persuade the convention attendees and the youth of his society about the importance of balancing the right to free speech and protest with the responsibilities of citizenship. He achieves this by juxtaposing the democratic process with the chaos of anarchy, connecting his audience and alluding to past historical protest. Let's just look at the thesis first. We can see that we've got a speaker, we've got rhetorical choices, and notice that they're not necessarily simple rhetorical devices. This writer is coming up with some more language to explain what she sees going on in this speech. Also have a purpose. So we've got a 2-sentence thesis, which is totally fine. This writer gave 2 sentences of introductory information to show the rhetorical situation, which is great because they show the location, they show the speaker, they show the audience, and they hint at some of the struggles that this speaker might need to overcome. They show that this is a controversial moment, which hopefully they're going to allude to in their body paragraphs. So this one is really good. Yes. Let's move on to body paragraphs, since you probably are grasping theses by now. The body paragraph, as I mentioned before, just like the thesis, has to have a specific structure. It needs to have a topic sentence, and that topic sentence is going to be a claim about rhetorical choices. Once you have your thesis, you kind of know what all your claims are going to be. Take, for example, the one we just looked at. In this example, I'm going to assume that we're probably going to have 2 body paragraphs here, and the claims are going to involve, in one case, juxtaposing the democratic process and the chaos of anarchy, and in the other case, probably allusions to past historical protest. This thesis sets up the 2 claims of the 2 topic sentences of the 2 paragraphs that are going to follow. Anyway, that's how you can get your claims. After your claims, you have to have evidence for your claim, followed by commentary that explains how the rhetorical choice works and how it persuades the audience and what it persuades them of. If you want to, then you could have more evidence and more commentary. The only thing to remember is every time you have evidence, you need to have commentary. You cannot have any evidence without any commentary because the reader doesn't automatically understand how your evidence connects to your claim or to your thesis. That's your job to explain it to them. That's the joy of writing. Yes. At the end of your paragraph, you'll have a concluding sentence that ties the information back to your thesis. For this exercise, I'm going to focus on topic sentences, evidence, and commentary. I haven't really taught my students to write concluding sentences yet, so I'm not going to focus on that for you. Let's read one body paragraph. We're going to start with a pretty strong one, just so you can see what's really necessary in order to fully explain a rhetorical choice. Jaren utilizes analogy to increase understanding in the mind of the reader. A little vague in the purpose. When Jaren addresses the amount of trees cut down every year, she equates this amount to France's land area. This is her evidence. This is my student's evidence. On its own, and everything that she's doing after this is commentary. On its own, the information is that humans are responsible for chopping down roughly 1% of the Earth's trees yearly. This is a paraphrase of the evidence, and it elaborates on the evidence. This is good. That initial number may not be concerning to the reader, as 1% is not a concerning number, but Comparing this percentage to the landmass of France makes the audience acknowledge that 1% is a lot, because to the reader, France is of substantial size. The moment that Jaron compares the percentage to the land area of France, the reader can now visualize the point she's trying to make in this paragraph. Mankind is taking too much of the Earth's national resources. You see how this writer has kind of walked us through the thinking necessary to show what readers might think about this rhetorical choice? She did a nice job. This analogy can also create a sense of urgency in the reader, as they can understand the magnitude of the dilemma. Again, a little vague, but good. This analogy could also appeal to a reader's logos, as it could lead down a path of thinking that if the amount of trees that are destroyed every year equates to the land area of France, then it will not be long until the whole world is depleted of trees. This is a nice job of explaining logic. I always get very nervous when my students introduce the idea of logic, because they often don't explain logic. But in order to explain logic, you need to show a thinking process, and this writer has done a great job of that. Overall, Jaron's analogy can increase the reader's understanding of the magnitude of cutting down such a large amount of trees, and could lead the reader to use their own logic to predict the future ramifications. This effectively accomplishes her purpose, that convincing the reader plants need more respect and should be valued more than they currently are. Here I see some of these elements, like this one right here is a lot more specific of this statement of purpose here. So this writer might want to move this purpose up here so it could be more specific. This information, some of it's a little repetitive, and you see her repeating some of the vague language that she used before, but these are just issues with the writing where the student is right now. She's going to become even more powerful as she learns to be more specific in her writing. The main thing she's done here really well, though, is articulate how the rhetorical strategy works in this commentary section. Thanks, writer. You did a great job. Hey, Buster. Hey, Buster. Oh my gosh, what in the world do we have out here? We've got everybody. We've got just about everybody out here. We got Big Vig, we've got Buster, we've got Leona, we've got the two baby Vigs, we got Calico Kitty.
There's Big Vig.
There's Big Vig.
And over here is Buttons.
No, it's Buttons.
Sorry.
It's Buttons.
Where's Tuffy?
Tuffy is inside, right?
No, he came out to eat.
Let's move on to a couple of other examples that might not be as successful, but they can still help us learn how the writer could be more successful. Jaron uses emotional appeals to connect with her audience and underscore the urgency of her message. I'm noticing immediately that we have a vagueness issue here, because emotional appeals, you can't really use an emotional appeal. You can make an emotional appeal, but you need to do so through a rhetorical choice. If you want to talk about emotional appeals, also, you need to talk about what emotions are being evoked by the rhetorical choice. So, on one hand, this does sound like a pretty good claim, but purpose is still vague because the message is vague here. There's no rhetorical choice clearly identified, and emotional appeals are a little bit vague. Let's move on. The phrase, "someone died who didn't have to," serves as a powerful reminder of the consequences of environmental neglect. Here's the evidence. That's great. Specific evidence, especially specific quotations, is really useful in a rhetorical analysis essay because it gives the writer something concrete to analyze. The consequences of environmental neglect, vague. This writer should be specifying what those consequences are. This could be a lot of things. This could mean the world will be destroyed tomorrow. This could be people in India won't be able to grow avocados. This could be a lot of things. We need to be more specific. This provocative statement acts as a wake-up call. This is figurative language. Try to use literal language only when you analyze, compelling readers to acknowledge the ethical implications of their actions. Again, this sounds pretty good if you just read it, but if you think about it, it's a little vague. By framing her scientific observations within an emotional context, again, vague, Jaron fosters a sense of urgency and responsibility. Better, encouraging readers to care about the fate of plants and the environment. Better. Nice job, writer. Through these emotional connections, vague again, She bridges her scientific insights with the broader ethical consideration, vague again, ultimately reinforcing the importance of her work as a biologist. Maybe a little vague. What I really like about this writer is the way they definitely have the correct structure in their paragraph. They're taking the time to try to do commentary. It's just the problem they have right now is the commentary is a little bit vague. Overall, though, this is a really good start, and this shows promise for this writer. I have a couple more examples for you. Senator Daniel Inouye persuades the listeners of the 1968 Democratic National Convention through the use of figurative language. That's good. Claim about rhetorical language. I love that. Inouye states, the marching feet of youth had led us into a new area of politics. Specific evidence. I love that. Inouye's diction choice of using metaphors add an authoritative and persuasive tone to his speech. This persuades the audience through allowing them to create an image in their mind, which makes the speech more memorable and thought-provoking. I can see this writer here trying to do the work of commentary, but they're unfortunately not totally successful. In order to do so, they would need to explain this metaphor here about the marching feet of youth. Explain why this person is talking about marching feet. Explain why it's a metaphor, and explain what the metaphor must be trying to tell the reader in a literal sense. There's no image in their mind that's really explained at all or clarified, and this may be making the speech more memorable and thought-provoking, but this writer should be telling us what the readers will be remembering and what they will be thinking about as they read this. Let's try this writer's second paragraph. Senator Inouye continues by saying, these expectations are the children of progress. The use of metaphors add rhetorical effect and connotation to this speech. Through saying children, he does not literally mean birth children. However, it is a connotation of the word and reveals an underlying meaning. So here I see this writer trying even harder to explain a metaphor because she starts to identify a part of the metaphor. Interestingly, this is probably connected to the marching feet of youth earlier, but this writer doesn't make that connection. Unfortunately, however, when this writer starts writing the connotation of the word and the underlying meaning, it's still vague. They need to be specific. And then when the writer continues to write about the deepening of the audience's understanding, it's better to just be more specific. It's hard to be more specific than this, but it's absolutely necessary. It just requires a lot more thinking than the writer is currently doing. Let's do another one. Personification. Marquette uses vivid language, imagery, to expose the reality of the Midwest from the ideal image of America. At the end of this piece, Marquette heavily emphasizes the eagerness of her immigrant grandparents, using an allusion to the well-known story about Archimedes and his famous Eureka on finding the way to test the purity of the crown. This is pretty good so far. We've got a topic sentence involving rhetorical choices, and then we've got evidence, which is showing us an allusion. This is really good. The only thing is that the topic sentence here tells us paragraph is going to be about imagery, possibly, and so far, what we've got is an allusion and an analogy. I think this topic sentence should really just be about an allusion. This not only emphasizes her grandparents' expectation, but serves as a metaphor for her grandparents in the Midwest. Their Eureka is finding the Midwest. Their pure crown, a place of opportunity for them, is hinted by the many allusions spread throughout the piece. This commentary is really trying to do a good job. And here it does a really good job because it explains the illusion and how the pieces of illusion compare to the actual situation that this writer, Marquette, is writing about involving her grandparents. It could just be a little more specific about the actual situation of the grandparents in the piece so the reader could follow along. Using this rhetoric, Marquette's personal story of her grandparents creates an impact on the image of the Midwest. This writer is trying to write a good concluding sentence. In some way they are. It's just that, like many of my other writers right now, they're a little vague right now. And let's look at one final example. Throughout the piece, Jaron uses astounding imagery to help the reader understand why they should make a difference in the world. Early in the prologue, she asks the reader to look out a window and see what people had created, including window framing, spackling, plumbing, wiring, and painting, people that can make a 100-story skyscraper capable of casting 1,000-foot shadow. This type of descriptive language helps the reader understand how humans can create almost anything they want or need except for plants. Plants are created through a natural process which humans cannot replicate. Let me stop here. This writer has done a great job here in the topic sentence by identifying a rhetorical choice and a thesis. Then, this writer has done an excellent job of introducing specific language. Following that, they're starting to explain this quotation, which is excellent. Let me continue. Humans can create elaborate technology, buildings, sculptures, and much more, but not nature. I see this in this quotation, but I'm not entirely seeing some of this other stuff that the student is writing about in this quotation. For example, she says, nature comes on its own, and once it is depleted, we can't replenish it. This is absolutely true, and this is absolutely something that Marquette is writing about. The only issue with this paragraph is that there's not evidence for this in this paragraph, and a reader could even become confused about whether or not these are Marquette's ideas or my student's ideas. Overall, this student is doing a great job of interpreting and explaining. It's just that they need to include a little bit more evidence. Jaren wants the readers to comprehend that once nature's gone, we cannot bring it back, and it is on us to make sure we defend it. Try to use literal language. She then goes into detail about how a leaf is created. So she's now introducing new evidence, which is totally great. Plumbing and pigmentation took a few months at most, giving rise to nothing more perfect than a leaf. Jaren uses such descriptive language to emphasize the layers of nature, how it is something we humans simply cannot recreate. Once nature is gone, each detailed leaf will be too. I see some repetition of the ideas from earlier here. Jaren's exemplary use of imagery helps the reader visualize why it is of utmost importance for the readers to do something about nature and its declining livelihood. Purpose here is specific. So overall, I found this to be an excellent paragraph. Some of the evidence and some of the reasoning is not perfectly connecting, but it's really good, especially for a writer at this stage in her writing. And this also shows you the kind of thinking and patient writing that is necessary in order for you to explain rhetorical choices in your commentary. Yes. And that's the end of my writing parade. I hope that by using actual student writing, you've been able to see common successes and common mistakes that students are making right now. If you're interested in rhetorical analysis, again, I have a playlist. Please remember to subscribe, and please remember to come back for more Zubify. Thanks for coming to Zubify. Thanks, writing. Thanks, students.